Good evening. Welcome to Silver Slumbers, a channel for achieving restful Z's that you truly deserve. Here I'm dedicated to guide you towards relaxations and better sleep. Tonight I have some truly chilling stories lined up for you to drift off into slumberland. So sit back, relax, and close those eyes. And remember, don't get lost in the dark. Warning: the following video contains depictions of drug use. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only and does not endorse or promote drug use in any way. Please do not attempt to recreate or imitate any of the behaviors depicted in this video. Listener's discretion is advised. This was 20 years ago. There were 3 of us. We were hanging out at my friend's apartment and planned on going to a show around 2 hours. We all dropped at the same time and took LSD on our tongues. My buddy, whose apartment it was, immediately went to go take a shower. My other friend and I were just hanging out in the living room, watching TV. After 5 minutes, I started to feel it, but I didn't say anything. Within 10 minutes, I am full on tripping. The ceilings and the walls are angling in. Everything is melting and booming. As someone who somewhat experienced with LSD previously, this is disconcerting. It usually takes me about an hour to kick in, but what I said to myself was, 10 minutes? Oh my god, where the hell is my mind gonna be for 3 or 4 hours? I turned to my buddy, watching TV. Hey, you tripping yet? I managed to speak, surprisingly. No. It's only been 5 minutes, he says as he stares at me, clearly sober in the eyes. We were not at the same wavelength. He will be no help to me. What the hell? We dropped the same shit at the same time. How is he not losing his shit right now? I think to myself when I said this. This is when my mind goes dark. I said this to myself. This is it, asshole. One hit too many. The straw that broke the camel's back. You have finally lost your fucking mind. You took the exact same drugs, but he's sober. Is something wrong with you? What is wrong with me? I had worked at the state mental hospital the summer before and worked with patients who seemed to be in an extended trip that they just couldn't get it out. I was convinced that this is going to be my future and my forever. My buddy's actually pissed that he's not getting off, while I'm just clearly losing it. I am trying to explain to them that we took the same drug, so it can't be the drug. I have just snapped and have a life of Therazine and drooling to padded rooms to look forward to. I have never felt more alone in my life. About 12 to 15 minutes later, after we dropped, I hear screaming from the bathroom. My buddy, who was taking a shower, comes running into the living room, butt-ass naked, screaming, "My legs, they turn black." I've never been more happy to see a fellow human be in a psychotic state. All is well. It wasn't me. I was the freaking drug. From there on it was a great trip. The worst that ever happened wasn't compared to other people's standards, but it felt like I was having the headfirst dive into crazy. You know how sometimes you think about your breathing or blinking and you just couldn't do it without thinking about it? Well, I couldn't stop thinking about what I was thinking. It wasn't too bad at first, just kind of a conversation with myself. But after hours of that, which felt like days on LSD, it was driving me completely insane. No, seriously. Think about what you're thinking about right now. And imagine you're in a loop of just repeating yourself over and over and over again, and you just have no way of escaping. A laugh finally pulled me right out of it. At one point, I was sitting on the couch with my head in my hands, been talking to myself about my thoughts for a while, and my significant other at the time sat next to me and asked me what was wrong. I told her, I just have thoughts, like, all the effing time. I'm always thinking, is this bullshit? I just want to stop thinking for half a second. She looked at me right in the eyes and said, honey, welcome to the inside of every woman's head. I laughed and went on to have a good time for the rest of the night. My fourth time, I almost lost my mind. I was with a friend who I was showing the ropes in the terms of psychedelics. Took 4 strong tabs and smoked a ton of weed during the come up, which I haven't done before. I hadn't ate much that day. I got back from a hard workout and was dehydrated. I was feeling good, calming myself and waiting for the fun. Then it hit me like food poisoning. I felt freaking terrible, and I knew that I took way too much after the first hour, and I began to panic a bit because I knew it was going to be another 11 hours ahead of me. My girlfriend came home and was worried. My friend, knowing that worry would overwhelm me, took me out of the house. We began to walk to the park near my place, and it was just very stormy outside, which made it feel evil, which was not helping at all. We went into this eerie part of the park that I found out later someone had been killed many years ago, and I thought I could smell a dead body. There were lots of ducks around us watching us, and I was extremely paranoid. I asked my friend if he could smell it, and he told me not to look to the left side, and we should get out of there. I kept asking him if there was a dead body there, but he wouldn't answer me, telling me to keep moving forward. I believed there was a dead body there, and all the grass around us began to change into dead bodies for miles. I couldn't look at the grass and just kept looking forward. The sky was intense. It was like fast motion video of an entire day in a matter of seconds, and cement looked like bone. There were people jogging. I saw them as they in a paranoid delusion. I thought they were coming after us, going to call the police or going to harm us in some way. I did my best to hang on and not to go crazy as we continued to walk it off through the field. We got out of the field into another park, and the visuals were unlike anything I've ever experienced before on any other trips. Still, assuming people were after us. I looked at the rock in the distance, and my mind turned into a truck. It began revving its engine at us. Me. And I believed that this truck was after us and was going to unalive us. Again, I hung on and kept moving. Eventually, we made it to a picnic table when I couldn't walk anymore and stayed there for 5 hours. I'm just very glad that no one called the police on us because in a somewhat populated area, I must have been speaking gibberish as I just couldn't hold a sentence together for about 3 or 4 words. As people walked by, I could hear them talking about us when I knew full well that they were not. It was like my mind was recoding what they were saying. Every time I took a look at them to make sure that they didn't know that we were effed up, my mind would make it look like they were just staring at us when they were not, as confirmed by my friend. It took everything I could to hold on, not act on any of the weird shit that you see going on, and use my complete 100% willpower to remain stable. Only cool thing was, although this is hard to explain, but I could see my thoughts and colors as they were processing. I cried a few times trying to discuss my past trauma from life, which freaked my friend out. My thought process were in fractal loops, so I had to fight and stop talking about the same things, and I thought I had prematurely damaged myself. After about 6 hours, I felt fine. I could talk again and hold complete sentences. What's crazy was that I thought I had superhuman intelligence as I was just writing stories for hours. The only done LSD one time since then, just 1 tab, and it was fine, and it will be my last time. Okay, you'll have to forgive me as I'm on a mobile phone typing this. This wasn't LSD, but salvia. I was with a group of friends, and one of them had brought some pretty potent salvia. We started taking turns and everyone was having a good time. I took a big old rip of the salvia and immediately melted into the couch. It literally took a few seconds. Next thing I know, I'm in a storybook land. Seriously though, cartoon characters frolicking, birds chirping, all that happy shit. From my friend's point of view, however, I was laying on the floor, drooling and spasming. One of them asked another to get me to a trash can in case I was about to throw up. This is where things turn for the worse. My altered state hears trash can, and then, bam, I'm a trash can. Honestly convinced that I was a trash can. What felt like hours went by as I tried to communicate with my friends to let them know that although I was a trash can, I could neither move nor speak as I was very much alive. It was driving me insane as they all laughed at me. It felt like an eternity. I was convinced that I had completely lost my mind and was just scared that this is my forever. I checked out for good. Eventually I came out of it and found myself crying in the corner of the kitchen with the other trash can. The whole thing lasted maybe about 10 minutes, yet it was the most single and terrifying experience of my life. I've done acid a fair few times and it's always been really fun, apart from this one a few years ago. I went on a bachelor party with an old childhood friend, got really drunk, and ended back at his flat with some of his friends. I knew that one of his friends there dealt acid. I'd taken it with him before, so I asked him if there was any around. He only does it in a liquid form, from a pipette. His particular composition is really strong. I decided to take a pipette full of his stuff. I was informed shortly afterwards that I'd be just taking the equivalent of 10 hits in one go. Being drunk, I found this very funny and passed out not long after I took in the hit. I woke up feeling like I had completely taken leave of my senses. The ceiling was swimming, making bizarre swirls, patterns, and for what felt like in the longest time, I couldn't figure out why. When the penny finally dropped, things did not get much better. I left my friend's house and toddled down the road in search of the train station. What should have been around maybe 20 minutes journey ended up taking me over an hour and a half. I lost quite a bit of time in the Tesco, staring at cereal packets. I also nearly got into a fight with a man because I was leering at him throughout his car window, to which he didn't take too kindly, and I had some serious jitters when I finally got home. Luckily, my family was away on a holiday and didn't witness me in this state that I was in. My bloodshot eyes, unkempt hair, and contorted facial expressions probably would make me gone down the well. My memory of the hours that followed is hazy at best, but what I do know is that I ended up in my parents' bedroom, naked apart from the duvet covers wrapped around me. Staring at myself in the mirror for what I have worked out is must have been nearly 12 hours straight, absolutely convinced that Jesus himself was going to step right through the wall right behind me and take me to heaven. The whole trip lasted over 24 hours. A last note. Don't mess around with too much acid. You can end up paranoid, religious, and naked and a lunatic. My memories of this event are patchy at best, but through talking with people involved, I patched them together in a logical order. I am very close to death, and I do not recommend Datura as a recreational drug. Though having survived the experience, it was incredible, life-changing, and terrifying. I still have trouble dealing with the emotions I experienced when I look back on it. This document is perhaps a therapeutic tool, so I'm using it to deal with it for all at once. All the names have been changed for obvious reasons. Philadelphia, Thanksgiving break, junior year in high school, my best friend and I, this was 2008, who is now my wife, Amanda, slept over at my house. We were big potheads at the time, but had never experimented with anything else. We woke up early to go to our friend Jeremiah's house because he grew weed and we wanted to celebrate the break by smoking it all day. I drank a beer that I stole from my dad on the way there. When we got there, a strange smell filled the house. His parents were away, and he had a pot with strange amber liquid on the stove. Jeremiah was an interesting kid. He appeared to be a run-of-the-mill street thug, but he was very interested in botany. He would see plants in people's yards, and he would know their Latin name and all the facts about them. When we got there, we asked him what the stuff was. He called it Datura loco. I have never heard of it. He said he got the seeds on the internet and planted it and make a tea from the seeds. He told me it had similar effects to weed, which was quite false. We smoked a blunt, but I was still intrigued. We hung up for a while and decided to go to Amanda's house and watch a movie. Before we left, I asked Jeremiah for some of the Datura tea. He put about 4 shots glass worth in an empty water bottle, and we left. On the way to Amanda's house, I drank it all. The dose was for both of us, but Amanda didn't want any anyways, so I drank all of it. It was the absolute worst tasting thing I've ever tasted in my life, but I was trying to force myself to drink it all. We arrived at the house and sat down to watch a movie. She put on Herbie, fully loaded. Luckily, I don't remember any of it. Sometime through the movie, I felt extremely thirsty. Since it was autumn, I poured myself into a glass of apple cider. It was actually difficult to drink. Every time I took a sip, it felt like my throat was closing up. I tried to drink it, but my thirst was just not quenched. We sat a little bit longer. Then I began to feel very uncomfortable. I had to pee. I got up and went to the bathroom, and nothing would come out. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, and I just could not pee. I decided to ignore it and went back to the couch. After the movie, our friend Samantha came over and took us to our friend's house, Robin, to smoke more. By the time she arrived, I was speaking mostly nonsense. I felt like I was talking normally, but neither of them could understand, so it was kind of frustrating. We got in Sam's car. On the ride, I thought I was smoking a cigarette, but I kept dropping it, and then I wouldn't be able to find it. This would continue for the next 3 days. We got to Rob's house, and they all smoked another blunt. They didn't give me any, but I didn't notice. I was still smoking my imaginary cigarettes and just speaking gibberish. I went into Rob's bathroom and tried to pee again. In my mind, I couldn't pee. For what I found out later, I actually peed all over the floor and on the walls. I also took all of his family toothbrush and put it in my pocket. I don't know why. They all went outside to smoke another blunt, and I did too. As they were smoking, I wandered away, and they found me about an hour later in a neighbor's yard, talking to a pine tree. I do not remember why. This is where my memory gets better. We left Rob's house, and we went to a party at my friend John's house. Again, I smoked imaginary cigarettes on the way there. I had no idea who I was, where I was, or who was I with, and I had just given up communication because no one could understand me. When we got there, a lot of my friends were there, and John's mom, who I had known since kindergarten. It was his birthday, and there were balloons everywhere. The balloons moved around and seemed to follow me. Their shape shifted between squares, circles, and triangles. I continued to smoke my imaginary cigarettes. At first, no one noticed my state because I was keeping quiet. I was standing in the corner because I was afraid of the balloons. John's mom saw me and came over to talk. She asked me about college, and I replied. To me, I gave her a logical answer, but to her, I was speaking gibberish. And then she knew that I was on something and took me to my parents, who took me to the hospital. This is where it gets messy. On the walk back to my parents' house, each piece of sidewalk I stepped on seemed to shatter away. I was terrified because I didn't want to fall through, but jolts of electricity ran through me when I tried to run. My parents were panicked and rushed me to the hospital because they didn't know that I smoked weed at the time. When I got to the hospital, they took me right away. To me, the doctors and nurses looked like monsters, and I kept trying to get out of my chair to run away. They had to physically restrain me. I didn't even recognize my own parents at the point. When they got a bed for me, they held me down and took my clothes off. I fought them as best I could, but any fast movements would send shocks of electricity through my body. I punched and kicked the nurses a few times, but was unsuccessful in my attempt to escape. Eventually, they calmed me down. One of the doctors told me that he was a wizard and had magic potions to cure me. He handed me a cup of black liquid and told me to drink it. It was charcoal to pump into my stomach, which was futile because it had been hours since I took it. I gulped the drink and vomited everywhere. Fast forward a little, no memory. Apparently at this point, my kidneys were shutting down, so they had to put a tube in my genitals so that I could pee. That was not fun at all. I just remember screaming very loudly and hard, a lot, and trying to fight everyone, but I was tied down. Fast forward a little more. I was now in a different room. Chewbacca was next to my bed, and I was tied to the bed still, and all sorts of IVs were in me. I kept trying to rip them out, so they had to put a lot of tape on them. Again, the imaginary cigarette came back, and I smoked it for a while, then dropped it on my sheets. I tried to look for it, but instead I found a stick shift for my car. I looked up and I was driving down the street all of a sudden. I drove for a while and then hit the brakes, but they were gone. I kicked my feet, but the sheets were covering them. Then I was back in the hospital room. I looked at the small fan in the room, and a strange, miniature girl was crouched behind it staring at me. I was scared of her and told Chewbacca to take out the fan, and he did. I found out later that Chewbacca was my dad. Next thing I knew, I was in Amanda's dorm, smoking a bowl, like I had a few weeks ago. All the same people were there, and that day repeated itself almost entirely. Then I was back in the hospital bed. The vision of the dorm room and the vision of the driving car kept happening over and over, interspersed with being in the hospital bed next to Chewbacca. The whole time I kept dropping the imaginary cigarette I was smoking. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital bed feeling like I was hit by a train. I still had a pee tube and was hooked up to IVs. I had only had a few memories of the past 4 days, but they had made no sense to me. As I write this, I realize again how patchy the memory is. My parents were there and explained to me what happened. They called Amanda to find out what I took. They told me my kidneys stopped working for almost 2 days and just now were working again, and my heart rate jumped from a dangerously low to a dangerously high over and over. The doctors gave me a 50% chance of survival. I spent the next days in the ICU before they released me. I was extremely weak for the next 5 or 6 days, and they made me go to a drug counselor. Over the next 3 years, I did many drugs heavily and developed some serious problems. Anytime I did acid or shrooms, I would see a small girl behind the fan, and it would creep the hell out of me. 8 months ago, I went to jail and then to rehab, and I have not used drugs since. Datura was the first step in a long road of drug abuse, and looking back, I wish it scared me straight. I still wish that I remember more what happened, but maybe, just maybe, it's best that I don't. My first and last Datura experience started with me and 2 friends sitting around the house, decided to rip off the Datura plant. After finding one and tearing a few flowers off of it, we sat at my mate's house and boiled it for about half an hour and drank about 3 cups each. Now, I am a very experienced drug user, but what happened next is totally unprepared for. At first, the only feeling I felt was extreme muscle tiredness, and I was almost unable to stand up. Neither could my friends, and then, bang. I'm in my friend's flat, chatting to his flatmate. I say, I want to go home now. He says, you are home. I say, I want to go home where my mom lives. She says, I am your mom. Bang. I suddenly realize that I am at home. It's almost midday. As my memory comes back, I remember smoking many visible cigarettes, thinking my mom and brother were friends of mine, talking to invisible people, basically not knowing where, what, how, or why. I later found out that I had been crawling on the floor. where we originally drunk the Datura, eating bugs while my friends convulsed and foamed at the mouth. When his sister called the ambulance, I leapt off the balcony in the pursuit of my friend, who was actually on the other side of the house. Then my mom called, by whom I still don't know, and she took me home, where I spent hours of imaginary rolling joints and snorting imaginary lines, talking to thin air about crap and basically scaring the crap out of my family. One friend wound up in the bushes with no belt, pants around his knees, just listening to music. The other was in a hospital in morphine-induced coma. He was released the next day. He had been on antidepressants, and that really messed him up. I can tell you that it's a very disturbing experience to take a drag on your cigarette and find out that you don't actually have one, or to talk to your brother about himself, thinking that he is someone else, or having your friends come around to see how you are, having a long chat with them only to realize that they're not actually there. I cannot remember that it was all maybe just 3 days ago, and I can't operate properly. It's taken 2 hours so far to write this because I just cannot see. I do remember trying to smoke my belt, throwing my cat in the bathtub, thinking my mom was Spike Milligan. The list goes on, and that's all I got. This story starts in my bedroom, a fairly cold, damp, and small place. It wasn't the best room, but it was mine, and I loved it. At the time, I'd been having a hard couple of weeks with my mental health, suffering from some severe anxiety from stress issues. I have suffered with anxiety all my grown life, but it gets more severe during the times of high stress. At the time, work was very stressful. In addition, my country was under strict social restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. All these factors combined make a very bad situation to be taking psychedelics, but at the time, I underestimated the power of LSD and did not respect it as I should have. I decided to take in the morning to take some of the LSD that I just bought online a few months ago after a very particular difficult night. This was motivating me by my past positive experience that I had with psychedelics, which had really changed my worldview and helped a lot with my long-term mental health issues. I was aiming to get some clarity into the causes of my anxieties and potentially to gain access with some difficult truths that I was in denial about, that I could just improve on my mental health. I took the tablet, I'm not sure what the strength is, in the late morning. As I knew LSD takes a long time, I wanted it to be done at the reasonable time for sleeping. I stick it on my tongue and let it sit for a while, then chew it and swallowed. At the time, I didn't think much about it. I just watched some malicious videos on my computer. 1 hour in, and I was starting to feel the effects. I just felt a little bit wobbly and strange, and the music I was listening to at the time started to feel very intense, as almost take over my mind. At this point, I would describe the feeling as fairly positive. Put on some of my favorite music on the phone and went to lay down on my bed and listen to it. I was still alone in my room. I lived in a shared household at the time, and my plan was largely to keep it to myself, and I had not informed anyone else while I was tripping. 3 hours in, I had been listening to the music for a long time, and I had been really entranced by it. I was experiencing intense visuals, which were geographicals and consist of thousands of infinitely fractals. It was really, really beautiful, but also incredibly intense. At this point, I felt inspired to go and create some art. So I got out my sketchbook and a pen and started jolting down some endless geometric patterns, combined with many, many human eyes. I was just allowing my brain to take the wheel and do the drawing, almost making my pen move in autopilot slowly. At some point, I had to go to the toilet because I had been drinking a lot of water, and it was making its way through me. I remember feeling a bit anxious about this, as I didn't want my housemates to notice my state. And the bathroom felt very creepy to be in. I think I was stuck in the bathroom for maybe about 15 minutes as I was struggling to get the function properly. I continued with the drawing for about half an hour, and then headed back to bed to listen to some more relaxing music as I felt a little bit overwhelmed. 4 hours in, I don't remember much about what happened between the drawing and now, but I remember this very vividly. I sat in the corner of my bed. I was suddenly 100% unequivocally convinced that I had died in my bed, and I was now experiencing some sort of afterlife. At this point, I was still experiencing strong visuals, but they were almost in the background of my mind as a feeling of sheer panic set in. My perspective of time just slowed down to sheer standstills, and I was completely overwhelmed by anxiety. I was shaking and sweating. I looked at myself in the mirror in my room, and it felt like that I was looking at someone else. I kind of knew logically that it was me, but it didn't feel like it was me. It's kind of hard to explain. I felt completely dissociated from my body, and my physical form felt more like a curiosity. At this point, I was completely and utterly out of my depth. 4 hours and 15 minutes in. From now, I was just in a state of complete living nightmare. I went and sat in the spot of the room where the heating unit was, leaning against it and covered myself in a blanket. The physical sensation of the heat was giving me a very kind of faint kind of grounding, but I still was 100% convinced that I was not alive and that this was me forever now. 5 hours, 30 minutes in. At this point, I'd just been sitting against the heater for about an hour. These times are very vague. They're just estimates of perceptions of time as my mind was very warped and everything was incredibly slow. I was trying to calm myself down by watching some random calming videos on YouTube and eating some snacks. However, I was still in the state of complete fear and panic. Can I describe the feeling? It's complete, incomparable to any level of fear that I've ever experienced in my entire life. I did not fear death. I feared the infinity of potential suffering that could exist. I feared the feeling of experiencing this fear for an eternity and being unable to forever escape it. I could not even kill myself to end it, as I was already dead. My poor brain just completely melted into soup of one pure, raw emotion. Fear. My vision was completely tunneled. I was shaking and my legs were just spasming. I would imagine my heart rate as high at this point, but I did not check. I periodically checked myself in the mirror to check for my pupils were dilating and almost trying to convince myself that I was just high. But I still could not shake the absolute certainty of the feeling that I was dead. In fact, at this point, I had the feeling that I had died 1,000 times over. And I am not sure what that means or where that came from. That's just what I thought. 9 hours in. At this point, I had been stuck in this cycle of lying in the bed, leaning against my heater, and occasionally using my computer to access some relaxing, nature-based videos to try to soothe myself. I was urinating very frequently, as I had been drinking high amounts of water, as for some reason it felt like it would help me. In hindsight, I may have just given myself a mild form of hyponatremia, which would only have added to my negative experience. Every time I went to the toilet, I was terrified. I found the room so scary, as it was dark and dingy. And also, it didn't feel very private for my housemates. I had severe anxiety about my housemates finding about everything when they came into my room and found my body. I think the situation of being alone and feeling worried about others finding out about the trip was a major cause of the anxiety that I experienced during this trip. The visuals were largely over at this point, with just some residual minor disturbance in my vision. This, however, did not give me a mental relief. I still felt like I was dead, and that I had been sent to hell. This hell for me was just experiencing this feeling complete overwhelming anxiety forever. The anxiety fed anxiety about being anxious, a form of vicious cycle that I just did not have the mental fortitude to break. 18 hours in. Not much change over the 9 hours from the last paragraph. I felt completely overwhelmed by fear and was just stuck in this constant loop in my bathroom, my bed, and the heater, and just trying to soothe myself with these various online resources. At this point, I had not had any human contact in around 24 hours or more, and I felt completely insane. I did not feel like this experience would ever end. I researched the duration of LSD. I had done this beforehand too. I was at least trying to be fairly responsible with the research. Anyways, and I saw that it was well over the expected duration for intense effects. In hindsight, I was no longer really tripping, except for some minor after effects, but I was in fact trapped in what was at this point essentially a 14-hour non-stop panic attack. I was completely exhausted, but completely unable to sleep. My mind was running at 100,000 kilometers per hour, and only focused on these things: that I was dead, I was insane, that I was terrified. Time was just passing incredibly slow, and I was in this constant state of fight or flight. It was now very early in the morning of the next day, and I needed to urinate again. This time, I decided to simply not face going to the bathroom, so I grabbed a blanket, rolled it up, and left to the house. It was raining outside, and I walked about 2 kilometers into the park. Not the nearest park at all, just the one that I remember from a few years back. I had intended to sit in the park with a blanket, but when I got there, I realized this made no sense. I climbed up a muddy slope into some trees in the park. Nearly slipping many times on the ground was just really wet because it rained, and I just proceeded to urinate in the bushes. I stood there for maybe about 15 minutes and then headed back home. It took me a while to get back home, and when I did, I went straight back to my bedroom. The experience of being outside was a bit nicer as the cold rain was a bit grounding, but at this point I felt so completely disconnected from my body that I felt like I was playing a third-person video game. When back in my room, I started to get more worried about how I was feeling and started to think about options. 20 hours. At this point, I felt like I had 3 options. 1, jump out of my bedroom window and see what happens. It was high enough to kill me, but I was convinced that I was already dead, so I wasn't sure what would really happen. 2, go outside, call an ambulance. This was terrifying for me though, as I was worried that I was alive, that they would just strap me down and just take me to a mental asylum, and that I would be trapped in this state of mind forever, as I would never have the opportunity to end my life, which was far preferable to feeling like this until I die of old age. And lastly, 3, ask my friends or parents for help. I knew at this point that I was not in a mental state or strong enough to do anything on my own. I had some points where I felt like a little more connected with my reality, or some less. Pervasive throughout the whole experience was the continuing, pure terror. 20 hours, 30 minutes. I decided that I did not want to jump out the window, as something very primal inside me, I guess my survival instincts, was truly against this idea. Even though it felt logical at the time to do it, I then decided to throw out all of my illegal substances out and go outside and call the ambulance. However, when I got outside to call the ambulance, the fear of being imprisoned in an insane asylum forever was too overwhelming, and after thinking about it for about half an hour, I just returned to my bedroom. 21 hours, 30 minutes. At this point, after thinking some more about it, I decided I had to speak to my housemate. I went out and found him and explained to him what was happening. At the time, I had a very strong feeling that he really did not exist and it was just a figment of my imagination, but I figured that this was no harm in speaking to him. He was helpful and he comforted me, but did not really know how to handle the situation. He watched some stuff on TV, but I had trouble concentrating due to my mind being consumed by anxiety. I repeatedly asked my housemate to reassure me that he was real, and he did, and reassured me that I would be fine. but I still assumed that this was just a version of him, saying that I existed in my own personal hell would say to me to trick me. I was feeling slightly more relaxed about having human contact, but still a solid 9 out of 10 on the scale of fear. 24 hours in, after sitting with my roommates for about a few hours, I realized that this was not going to cut it. He tried to convince me to go to the hospital, but I was strongly against it due to the aforementioned fears. I instead opted to call my parents. However, I had to get him to explain what happened on the phone because I was just crying too much and I felt paralyzed and unable to speak. My parents were very concerned and agreed to come and get me and take me home with them. 28 hours in. At this point, I had survived the journey home with my parents, who were mostly just worried about me at this point. I was finally starting to calm down as I was able to notice that my trip was coming to an end and that the anxiety started to fade. I started to feel more normal. I eventually managed to finally sleep a little bit. I will end the time-based prompts here and talk a bit more of the aftermath. For a few days after the experience, I struggled getting to sleep at all. Any slight thought about nature of reality would trigger these feelings of me being dead and everything not being real and part of my personal hell again. I felt very dissociated from my body for this period. I had little appetite and I did not have that many bodily sensations in general. These, I guess, were just the aftermath of the extremely long panic attacks and traumatic experience. Over the course of the next few days, the recurrent panic attacks became less frequent and severe. At first, I had to go to sleep at the same bed with someone else, but after around day 3, I started to be able to sleep on my own. For the first week or so afterwards, I had to have someone in the same building with me at all times, or I would immediately have the panic attack. For the first 3 or 4 days, they had to be in the exact same room with me. Over the course of the next few weeks, I built up confidence being alone in the room or building for a long period of time until I could spend large portions of my day alone. I went to the doctors and was prescribed with medication to help me sleep and help with my anxiety. I also started therapy after a couple of weeks. The trauma of the experience caused me to develop some agoraphobia. As previously mentioned, this started off with being a matter of unable to be alone in any capacity. After a few weeks, it was just more of a case of just struggling to go outside. After a month, I was able to go outside on my own for some period of time, but still struggle with the public and busy places. Over the course of the next few months, I finally gained some confidence of being able to live on my own independently. Over the course of the next year, I gradually conquered the agoraphobia and panic attacks. After around 6 months, I was completely living independently and was able to move out. I still had a few lapses where I had to travel back to my parents for a few weeks, but these became less frequent and severe until they stopped occurring about a year after the initial experience. To this day, I still suffer a very mild form of agoraphobia to do with being in places which were very far away from home or civilization, but I am confident that I will conquer this too with time. This experience completely changed my life. It was traumatic and I would never wish it on anyone else. I would urge everyone to respect the powers of these drugs and just make sure to take them only in a safe and good place, and make sure that they have a plan if the trip goes south. In hindsight, I had some positive of these things. My capacity for handling traumatic experiences much higher now, and it forced me to come clean to my parents about my lifelong mental health issues and seek traditional treatments for these. I still have the occasional moments of panic attacks, and writing this was very difficult as it caused me to relive all those horrible memories. The feeling of being alive and reality existing gradually came back, but it took a long time to be something that it didn't bother me. I still have no proof that I am alive or that anything exists, But I have the philosophy that it does not matter, as I'm capable of enjoying whatever my existence may be. If I'm stuck in a personal hell, it's not so bad. I have quite a lot of fun in my life. It's pretty enjoyable these days. For anyone who has experienced anything like this, it does get better. I promise. And please, be open with those who care about you and let them help you heal. Life can be great, even if it takes a year or so from you.